Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. People who believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, angels. What happened that made you start believing? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Okay, so this happened when I was 6, and I'm nearly 50 now, so my memory is a little hazy. I had a friend the same age as me called Kelly. We used to hang out together with other children who lived on our block and local area. One afternoon, Kelly knocked on my door. I answered, and she asked if I could go to the corner shop with her to get some bananas so that we could make a milkshake. Before I could answer, my stepmother called down the stairs to say I had to clean my room and was not going anywhere. Kelly kind of shrugged and said she was going anyway, and that was the last I saw of her. Early evening came, and her mother had knocked on every door looking for her. All of the dads got together and went looking for her. It got later and later, and when I went to bed, she still had not been found. In the early hours of the morning, I heard a noise outside of my bedroom window, a kind of intermittent moaning. When I looked out, I saw a policeman was sat on the wall, sobbing and being comforted by another policeman. I watched for a while and then went downstairs. My dad told me Kelly had been found dead in the cups in front of our block. I later found out Kelly had been murdered by one of the older boys who hung out with us. I had to give a statement, as I had seen Kelly the day before. Later, police feedback that Kelly had been killed hours before she knocked on my door, and that my recollection of events was impossible. The man who owned the corner shop said Kelly had never come in to buy bananas. I'm pretty sure the police thought I was lying, and that my mother was either lying as well or mistaken about what she'd heard. From that time onwards, I believe that Kelly came to visit me one more time before she left for good. And since then, the idea of the paranormal has just seemed normal. My childhood home is haunted. Where my house is, there used to be another house. It burned down, and the father of the family who lived there died in the basement during the fire. The family sold the land, and the house was cleared away and a new house built over the old basement. My grandmother, who lives in the same town, knows the family. Anyways, my parents bought the new house when I was a toddler, and we've lived there for about 20 years. The ghost of the guy who died in the fire named Charlie lives in our house, and it's pretty obvious. My mom says that once, when she and my dad were arguing, she took to the bedroom to cool off. She said, "Charlie, I wish you could knock some sense into him." Not 5 minutes later, my dad starts swearing from the living room. The shelves above his chair had fallen and knocked him in the head. They'd never fallen before or since. Any animal we have, a couple dogs when I was a kid, my cat now, will stare down the hallway for long stretches of time, then go bananas chasing something from the living room at one end to the bedrooms at the other end, like they're playing with someone. I personally have heard footsteps, big, heavy footsteps, like someone wearing work boots, walk up and down the hallway, especially at night. It scared me as a kid, but now I just take it as Charlie checking our safety. My grandmother, while visiting us one time, woke up in the guest bedroom to a shadow man standing in the doorway. She hid under the blanket for a few minutes, then decided it was safe. When she came out of the blanket, the shadow man was at her bedside, leaning over her. She hid under the blanket again until she fell asleep. The most concrete evidence for me was the time Charlie scared something off. My bedroom was always the coldest room in the house, and often I felt uncomfortable in there, like I was sitting next to someone who disliked me. One day I went to grab clothes for a shower and walked right into a wall of evil halfway down the hall. I can't describe it fully. Nothing looked different. I just felt like I had physically crossed a barrier into a force field of hatred. I knew without a doubt in my body that I was in danger, and without thinking, I hauled ass to the opposite end of the house, to the kitchen. I stood at the stove, shaking. I was about 14, afraid to look down the hallway in case I saw whatever was down there, but afraid that if I didn't look, it would sneak up on me. I eventually convinced myself that I was being a baby, then started slowly through the dining room and towards the hall, afraid the entire time. All at once, I felt a strong breeze blow by my left side, going down the hall towards my room, like how it feels when someone runs by you and barely avoids running into you. And I thought for a second that I heard a man's voice. I continued down the hall, and I couldn't feel the evil anymore. I went into my room, and it felt lighter and more comfortable than it ever had in my life. I thanked Charlie, and from then on, I've never felt that uncomfortable feeling in my room. I think he protects it now. But yeah, growing up in a haunted house is pretty convincing in my opinion. Well, I mean, if you have to be haunted, growing up in a house with a good ghost is pretty cool. Charlie helped you out. Not bad. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend called Mr. Johnson. I would talk to and play with him all day, and my parents mostly ignored it because it seemed harmless. Well, one day while my mom was out watering the yard, a neighbor walked by and started a conversation. He said he was surprised that she moved in there because it was supposedly haunted, and that the previous tenant had died in the house. His name was Mr. Johnson. After that, my parents got really uncomfortable when I talked to my friend, and I eventually stopped interacting with him. I also have a very vivid memory of talking to something on a curtain rod in the same house. I can't remember what we were talking about, only that its voice was kind of raspy and weird. When my dad came in and asked what the F I was doing, I remember the thing saying, "Say I'm God." So I told my dad I was talking to God and thought that freaked out look he gave me was hilarious, even though I had no real understanding of what God was or why that was such a strange thing to say. This just happened a couple of days ago. I was never really a religious or spiritual person. I wouldn't say I'm a full-fledged atheist. Maybe I am, or was. But anyway, my wife passed away 9 days ago. She was always more spiritual than I was, and she had a flair for some of the more macabre things. So among her possessions, she had a deck of tarot cards. I had not seen this thing in years. It must have been tucked away somewhere. But our dog found it while I was out of the house, and when I came home, there were cards everywhere. But the dog had only chewed up one card. All the others were intact, and it was so strange, and I had no clue what any of the cards are supposed to mean. So I Googled it. The one card our dog chewed up and left on display for me to find when I got home was called the Five of Cups. It features a person in a black shroud looking at 3 cups that have spilled over in front of them, and they are so overcome with grief they failed to notice the 2 cups still standing behind them. It was just so strange and shocking to be presented with a tarot card about grief and loss at that time by our dog, kind of wondering what's going to happen next. I got a job to install a security system in an old house. The family that moved in there had a little 5-year-old-ish boy. The boy was playing around by himself, and he would sometimes ask random questions to what seemed like me. I answered one of his questions, and I remember him telling me, "Oh, sorry, I was just talking to my friend." The mother poked her head in and told me that he had found a new friend since they moved in. She then leaned in closer and jokingly said, "It's actually kind of creepy." Well, later that day, the boy was in the kitchen playing, and he was trying to reach a bag of chips on top of their fridge. I told him he should probably get down off the counter, and I could get them for him. He proceeded to get down and say, "Oh, my friend will get it." I just kind of shrugged it off and went back to working on running the cable through the wall. All of a sudden, the bag of chips explodes on the floor. I turned around thinking the kid must have gotten back on the counter, but instead was on the floor picking up the chips. He gave me a look and said, "My friend accidentally knocked them off." I asked the boy where his friend was now, and he points on top of the fridge and said, "He is right up there, smiling at you." I never got such a freaky chill in my life. I am a Buddhist, and I have personal evidence of the continuance of existence after death. In Buddhism, there is neither a body nor a soul that continues, eternalism. This is the doctrine of anatta. What continues is more subtle. However, suffice to say that death is not the end of existence. I had not talked to my father for 18 years, and he was a bipolar sufferer who self-medicated with alcohol and drugs, and in his rage and hatred was sexually and physically abusive. My mother finally agreed to kick him out of the house, and he moved into a cheap accommodation, rented to him by the owner of the local corner shop where he'd bought his cheap booze for so many years. His eldest son, my half-brother, moved in too. My father killed him in an argument. Therefore, I had not talked to my father since I was 18. In February 2017, I had 2 nights of vivid dreams where my father came and apologized to me. I felt great joy and peace alongside my forgiveness of how he'd personally treated me. This was in marked contrast to the nightmares about him I'd suffered sporadically before then. In October, a solicitor got in touch to say that he had died, alone and still in the grip of his addictions, in February. It took them a while to find us, as me, my mother, and my 3 siblings had all moved, so they had to look for us, which was intentional. Those dreams could well have been a coincidence, but they were too emotionally important for that to be a satisfying answer. Probably too late now, for anyone to see this, but it's something that's always made me think. When my sister was a baby, she was always crying and would not sleep through the night unless she was in bed with my mom. My stepfather worked nights at a hospital, so he was not there when this occurred. Mom told me she woke up because she felt a hard, bony finger tapping on her shoulder. She woke with a start to this finger and realized in the night she had rolled on top of my sister and was suffocating her. If she had not woke up, my sister would have probably died. My mom turned around in a panic thinking my stepdad had come home early and had poked her to wake her up, but he was not there and wasn't there till the next morning. She swears to this day that an angel tapped her to wake her up to save my sister. I've heard plenty of stories of phenomena like this that parents are alerted of some emergency with their children. Maybe it's just that paternal and maternal instinct. Or a guardian angel. Worked at Winchester Mystery House in San Jose for a while. Because I wasn't driving yet, I took the bus regularly to work. This bus usually dropped me off excessively early, like 7 a.m. for my 8 a.m. shift. Sometimes I would meet up with the key holders for the house and help open it, turning on lights and opening doors and such. On one of these occasions, I ran into a man in white overalls in one of the rooms. I say good morning and go about my way. He nods and says good morning with a really thick accent, German. I think, no biggie. Sometimes there are workers who show up early to retouch some of the parts or another of the house. I hadn't seen this guy around, but he might be newer. I mention it to the key holder when I see him in one of the offices. He takes me to one of the workmen's sheds and points to a picture on the wall. Lo and behold, there's the workman with about 7 other people. The photo was dated to 1908. The tour guide named him Clyde. Stuff like that wasn't a daily occurrence, but happened regularly enough, particularly in the early mornings. I got used to being respectful of the house and whatever inhabitants lived there, enough so that when I put in my 2 weeks' notice, I got a gift from Mrs. Winchester. She played the piano for me. I loved that house, and it broke my heart to leave it. When I was 20 or so, I worked for a carpet cleaning service. It was really just me and 2 other guys who started it. I eventually proved myself, and they gave me a van and my own clients to work. So, I head up into the rural Tennessee hills to do a job one morning. It was a private house. I spoke with a middle-aged woman who owned it and began my process. Pulling out the machine, hooking up to a water source, etc. As I make my way through the house, I noticed that the woman I spoke with was hanging out in the kitchen, and there was the husband doing work in the garage and out front. No other signs of people in the house. I'm making my way down the main hallway, straight into the master bedroom, I assumed. As I push the machine in the room, watching what I'm doing on the floor, I see an older woman out of the corner of my eye. She's wearing a white gown, standing up out of a chair in the far right corner of the room. I look up to apologize, and I see her briskly walk around an alcove where the chair was. I could not see the right wall of this alcove, so I assumed it was an exit, and she simply was leaving so I could finish. I continued and made my way to the alcove. As I turn into it, I see that there is a closet, with the door ajar and light off. My heart sank, and I half-assed the rest of the job and booked it out of there. It never felt aggressive or anything. Peaceful, actually. Just an old soul hanging out, I guess. 15 years later, and it's still so vivid in my mind. This is a little late, but the reason I believe in the supernatural is because of a traumatic experience as a kid. It was Easter Sunday, and my parents had set up an Easter egg hunt in the house for my brother and I. The eggs were all over the house, and my parents had put $1 coins in each one of them. Even in their bedroom, our bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. My parents put us on a timer and said anything we don't get after 30 minutes, they would take back. My brother and I decided when the time started, we would book it back to their bedroom because it was the furthest room from us, and we would work our way back. So my parents started the timer, and we ran up to their bedroom and into the bathroom. We scoured the shower, under the sink, etc. Then I shut the door because there's a shelf that's hidden behind it with it open. There was an egg there, and we grabbed it, but the door locked behind us. My brother and I immediately panicked and tried to open the door and bang on it and started yelling that our parents were cheating, and they had done it on purpose. We were just playing around, and it was all giggles and fun. Then the room started shaking. I immediately got freaked out. I was only 8 or 9 at the time. My brother was 5 or 6. He was just kind of confused on why it was shaking. The blinds in the bathroom were shaking, and the windows started flashing with really, really bright lights outside. I thought we were going to die. I started screaming and crying immediately and banging on the door for real now. And finally, after about 10 seconds, my thoughts turned to keeping my brother safe. I opened up the cabinet door and started trying to shove him in there because I remember my teacher telling us about getting something to protect our heads if we had an earthquake. There was a really loud noise outside, like a lot of wind, and this really deep noise like something coming toward us. My brother was too big to get fully in the cabinet, but I sat down against it to try to hold the door shut, and I covered my head and closed my eyes and thought we were going to die. Then the bathroom door opened, and all of it stopped. My mom was looking super confused at me when I opened my eyes. I immediately jumped on her and hugged her and cried and yelled that it was an earthquake because that's the only explanation I had. My brother was stuck in the cabinet, and she immediately freaked out and yelled for my dad, and he ran upstairs. My mom sat me on my bed and got my brother out, and he was crying and scared too. I told her what happened. She probably would have thought I was nuts, but my brother confirmed the lights, the shaking, and the scary-ass noise. She and my dad had absolutely no explanation on this, and she said they didn't hear us or any noise. They only came upstairs because there was like 5 minutes left on the timer, and they thought something was wrong if we were still upstairs looking for eggs, or they would be nice and give us a hint to go downstairs. About a week later, I told my neighbor about it. He was one of my favorite people because he was super funny and let us ride our bikes up his big driveway. When I told him about it, he immediately looked freaked out. He said that a long time ago, probably about 10 years ago, there was a bad plane crash in that neighborhood. I rode my bike back home and told my mom. She freaked out too, and looked it up, and it was true. Since then, I've believed in that shit. Was sitting on the couch downstairs and could hear someone walking loudly up the stairs. Problem is, the stairs were on the other side of the room from where I was hearing this. Sound was clear as day. I went upstairs, and as a 21-year-old, I fell asleep on my parents' bedroom floor that night. It freaked me out that bad. Next morning, of course, my mom is asking what the F am I sleeping in their room, and I explain I heard the stomping up the stairs, but no stairs there, and her mouth gaped open. Damned it, the house hadn't been partially gutted and redone in 1989, 10 years before we moved in, and the stairs used to be exactly where I heard the stomping. I refused to believe my mom until we went upstairs, and sure enough, she showed me there was an indent in the ceiling right where the wall partitioning the room from the stairs would have been. I never believed in anything like that before. I'm still not sure I do. I mean, if I didn't learn that the stairs had been there, I would have thought I just went a bit nuts in the head for a minute instead of believing I was hearing ghosts or something. But the remodel moving stairs was just too much of a coincidence. I remember when I was 9 years old, I used to hang this dumb paper chains in my room. I would just hang up pieces of paper on a wall like decorations. Anyway, one day I was playing in the room and looked forward at my shadow and just stared at my shadow. For some reason it seemed a little off. Then the shadow proceeded to stretch up, or stand up, it's hard to describe, and a hand reaches up and knocked one of the papers off the wall, and it was taped up there pretty good. I remember freaking the F out and just bolted out of there into my grandma's room. Over time I got over that, but then 8 years later, I remember telling my dad the story as a joke because I thought he would laugh, and his response was, "Oh yeah, you mean shadow people? Yeah, our family always sees that, especially the oldest in each family. I've seen it, my dad has seen it, my mom has seen it, and her mom, etc. By the way, they are the oldest siblings in their families, as am I." I was scared, of course, but thought he was effing with me again, so I called my grandpa and grandma literally 10 minutes later about shadow people, and they proceeded to tell me all these stories about being followed and scarier shit than I've experienced. It honestly freaked me the F out, and since then I try to look away from my shadow. Also, my grandma has a lot of shadow people stories but refuses to tell me because, as she has told me, I'm very sensitive and wouldn't be able to take it. She's not wrong. For those of you that believe in the supernatural, what do you think about some type of ghost or spirit following generation after generation? Might as well, right? My childhood best friend had a rottweiler, Tyler, who passed away a few years before we started hanging out. One night, I spent the night at his house and woke up in the middle of the night to a rottweiler staring at me in the face. I thought it was his new rottweiler, Rowdy. He had, so I went to pet it and my hand just went right through it. I told him about it the next morning, and they said it was normal for them to see or hear him still roaming around the house every once in a while. I've had a few paranormal interactions since, but that was the one that solidified my beliefs.